Charles, how are you doing? It's been quite some weekdays.
Sure. I'm doing great. Thank you, Samson. And how are you doing?
I'm very well. I'll teach you how to trend on Twitter if you want to. Do you want to learn?
I think I'm comfortable where I am. I've been seeing you trending on Twitter.
Do you want me to trend tonight or over the weekend?
You have so many trolls on Twitter.
Absolutely, and I enjoy those. I do enjoy those. I'm planning to trend tomorrow or around Sunday, and so I have a topic in stock.
Sure.
But for now, let's know what the topic is for the Frontline, shall we?
Well, we did tease out actually on Twitter last week and said, what should we be discussing? And the question of torture came up prominently. So we did have a discussion about it briefly last week, and we're picking up that conversation again with a very eminent panel to discuss it. Tonight, I'm asking, rights abuse, is the quest for sustainable justice transformation taking the right direction?
Nbs Frontline. The judiciary, this third arm of government, charged with the responsibility of promoting the rule of law and maintenance of order in society, has had its share of frustrations in the execution of duties. First is the interference from other arms of government, whose interpretation of justice is sometimes not in line with what is stipulated in the law books. Then comes the level of investigations by those concerned. While the law stipulates that suspects should be produced in court within 48 hours, this has only remained on paper, giving the impression that here, things are done the Ugandan way. But one cannot miss the security raids on courts, resulting in 2 arrests of suspects, even when they have been granted bail. In circumstances like this, where is the judiciary supposed to run to? And what about those who are never produced in court, even when sessions are arranged to have them heard? There have also been complaints of bullying by the advocates, but how would one bully someone he calls his lord? All the while, there are continued allegations of corruption among the judicial officers, a song whose chorus the highest office in the judiciary has promised to handle, a promise the population is waiting to see enforced. While opening the 2022 new law year, the president promised to increase funding to the sector. Could this be the magic the country has been waiting for to see a transformation in the judiciary, or should we still wait for another savior? This is The Frontline. Nbs Frontline.
A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the NBS Frontline. My name is Charles Mwangu-Shampagi. And indeed, the Frontline and the focus of the nation is on allegations and what appears to be evidence of torture against citizens. Questions are being raised about the silence of the judiciary, or the perceived silence of the judiciary on this matter. Statements coming in from various government officials, some defending, some indifferent. And in Parliament just this afternoon, today afternoon, a motion to censure the security minister, General Jim Museveni, over presiding over allegations of torture. Now, I did speak to General Museveni just a while ago. He's out of the country, and he said the Minister for Public Service and Constitutional Affairs has spoken out, the government chief whip has spoken out, so government has spoken. Torture is not a policy of the government of Uganda. But what is the practice? Where did it start from? And is there a way out of where we are? My panel tonight, let me start from the judiciary itself. We have the spokesperson of the judiciary, Mr. Jameson Karemani. Very nice to have you.
Thank you.
We know that a lot of efforts have been going on to transform the judiciary itself. Everybody who walks through Kampala or moves through Kampala sees the infrastructure development around the High Court premises. I understand there you're putting up 2 towers, one to house the Supreme Court and another to house the Court of Appeal. Is that sufficient to deal with the questions? The number of judges has increased, judges are paid better. What exactly is going on? Magistrates are more, but is there delivery of justice? Is the turnaround time adequate? We have the former president of Lawyers of Uganda, Mr. Francis Gimara, senior counsel, Francis Gimara. I'm told counsel is a peerage title, so us none are not supposed to call you counsel because we don't fall in the fraternity.
Yes, counsel is actually a title you use in addressing a fellow lawyer, particularly in court. In fact, mostly it's supposed to be in court, but we have carried it into practice. But
like elected officials and honorable.
Yes.
We were somewhere with Ofono Pondo, who is a frontliner here, talking to newly elected members of parliament in 2016. And I think when I raised the question, when I raised the issue and said, I am not supposed to address you as honorable because I am not, members of parliament were very mad at me. They wanted to eat me up. But let me introduce frontliner, head of the Uganda Government Media Center, spokesperson for the NRM and the government, Ofono Opondo.
Thank you, Charles.
You did educate me on how to pronounce your name properly. So for the benefit of our viewers, could you do it again for us?
Unfortunately, you seem to be a low learner student because I thought you would take the week to practice. Ofono Pondo. Ofono Pondo Podel.
Ofono Pondo Podel. Yes. Huh?
Ofono Pondo Podel.
Okay. Whatever that means. From Molanda.
Ofono, son of Opondo, Opondo, who is the son of Odel.
Ah.
Oh.
Okay. Very nice to have you.
Thank you.
I hope that Chairman Mao will be joining us in a moment from now. I want to start with Jameson. That's the question that many people have been asking for a long time. The judiciary, one of the three arms of government, which receives, processes, and is responsible primarily for delivery of justice to Ugandans on various issues, has had issues before about funding, about staffing, about so many others. But the bigger question is the silence, the loud silence of the judiciary on ongoing allegations of torture. And it's not the first time. You saw the images in the trigger that we ran. Why is the judiciary silent?
Thank you very much, Charles. We are silent because we are observing our mandate. Our mandate as judiciary is to adjudicate, to resolve disputes between individuals, between individuals and the state. These disputes we are talking about must be brought to us. We don't solicit for them. We don't go out looking for them. So they come to us. Now, about what is on the on debate, what is being said about the torture and the like, like I said, we are adjudicators, and therefore we must wait for the disputes to come to us. Now, some debate is ongoing, and we are the adjudicators. We are supposed to be the arbiters, and you expect us to join the debate, to condemn this side and condemn the other one. Then thereafter, you see one of the parties coming before you. That means you have already pronounced your judgment. It should be expected by the other side before you hear the matter. So what we have got to understand is that judiciary cannot go talking the way others talk in the papers, in the rallies, holding press conferences. We talk through our decisions. Once a matter comes before us, we shall talk.
Some matters have come before you, and
yes,
you have talked.
And we have talked.
The language you have talked, some people have said, you have spoken the language of the perpetrators of torture.
Now
you've spoken their language. The latest one is a man who says he was tortured,
yes,
comes before a judicial officer and says, please grant me the right to go and get better treatment. And you say, no, we don't think your issues require treatment outside of the country.
Yes.
There's a question of members of parliament who come to you and cry and say, we've been tortured, we need to get out of here to get better treatment.
Yes.
And you say, no, we can't give you that. When, for example, the question of bail is a constitutional right, the access to a gentleman's passport
yes,
is within reasonable ground should have been granted. And
now, of course, some of the cases we are talking about are before court, and some are even trying to apply for bail again, which would mean that if we have to discuss, we may have to discuss the bail terms now, which is not right. But what I can shortly, or in short, what I can say about that is that yes, some of these people are produced before court. Once they are produced before court, the court has to observe the conditions in which they are. In some cases, they will say, I am tortured, and it's not eminently out, clearly seen. Where it has been eminent and clear, the courts have come out. And we have a case in point of Honorable Zake, who was brought before court on a stretcher, and the court said, no, first take this person for treatment, we cannot entertain him. And that one, we are not looking at it, we are only looking at those cases where the courts have gone ahead to take plea and later grant bail, because the same court later granted bail. So it does not follow that when a matter is presented before court, in every case, the bail must be granted there and then.
It is your assertion, Mr. Karimani, that you're not acquiescing to the abuse of rights that the other arms of government, particularly the executive, is being accused of. You're not aiding, you're not acquiescing.
Definitely we are not. And that's why we have, when matters have become for us in torture cases, courts have come out and have actually awarded damages. They have used words which show that it is not right. They have granted bail some of those people. So that one goes ahead to show you that we are not part of that. We are not aiding the torture.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll come back to you in a moment. Let me first go to Francis Gimara. One is a very broad question. As an officer of court, as a Ugandan, what is your take on the allegations and what appears to be evidence of torture? And some people have used very strong words and said the return of the dark days of torture in this country.
Yeah, thank you, Charles, and good evening, viewers. I am happy to be here again to discuss this matter. My view is that this country, undoubtedly, through that constitution, made a very fundamental statement of how this country must be governed. And the history to those provisions in the constitution takes into account where we have come from. So what we have boldly under Chapter 4 in terms of rights are promises to citizens. On torture, it's even very clear that the same is non-derogable, meaning it is one of those rights under no circumstances must you touch the right against torture. What we have seen, unfortunately, in the last couple of days is not consistent with the constitutional promise in that document. It's also not consistent with the oath that our leaders have taken to uphold the Constitution. And we want to remind them that this matter can only get worse. Personally, I know that for some time now, torture has been an issue. I recall when I was president of the Uganda Law Society, routinely suspects were brought to court, some with wounds, some, limping, and we issued a couple of statements asking our leaders to oblige to the provisions of the law. And I recall that the president, soon thereafter, around May 2017, issued his guidance to the security forces. And in that statement, he was very categorical that torture is a futile exercise. One, it damages that person being tortured. Two, even in terms of the value of evidence that you need, you end up destroying the evidence. And the actual crime is not dealt with because through acts of torture, you have actually messed up the entire criminal process. We even went to an extent as a law society to set up a standing committee of lawyers who were willing to prosecute persons who engage in acts of torture. And about 50 lawyers volunteered to be on that committee. The challenge with torture is that even when we set up that committee of lawyers to help citizens prosecute those engaged in torture in their personal capacity, we did not get a very good positive response by the persons tortured.
Why do you think so?
It's just because of the nature of the crime. The few interviews we did, some of the people who come out from torture don't want to litigate on the matters.
Is that
and because it is damaging and they have survived to live for another day, they prefer that let the matter rest. Now, of course, those are about 4 or 5 years ago. So we thought that this matter would be dealt with decisively by the executive. The recent trend of what we have seen is, to me, very shocking. And I think that we condemn acts of torture, but beyond the condemnation, I've seen posturing. At what point does the government of Uganda take responsibility? And this is a question we must ask. At what point do you prosecute people who have engaged in torture? It's unacceptable. This government came into power on promise of doing away with these acts. So we need to remind them that that was part of the fundamental change that they promised Ugandans. And they've done some work on that path. But to go back to those days, I shudder as a Ugandan.
Mr. Fonopondo, let me come to you. As soon as the NRM government took power in 1986, by June 1987, the NRM government had ratified the International Convention Against Torture. June 1987. I have judicial officers here who will help me out if I get some things wrong. By 1995, you create a constitution, put in Article 24, prohibiting torture, making the right against torture, inhuman and degrading, cruel treatment criminal. Article 44.1, I think?
Yeah.
I think Article 44.1
non-derogable.
Makes it a non-derogable right. In 2012, June 2012, we passed the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act. And its long title, it speaks very strongly. The President assented to it on 27th of July, 2012. And it says, an act to give effect in accordance with Articles 24 and 44A of the Constitution to the respect of human dignity and protection from inhuman treatment by prohibiting and preventing any form of torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, to provide for the crime of torture, to give effect to the obligations of Uganda as a state party to the United Nations Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment and other related matters. Today, as we speak, Ugandans are drawing comparisons between a government that created all these legislative and legal framework with the government of Idi Amin that hadn't looked at any law.
Well,
how did you get to this? The question that Gimara asked.
Thank you. Let me just restate what the Minister of Justice said on the floor of Parliament, that the government of Uganda, by policy, does not encourage, does not condone, does not shield, does not accept torture as a method of containment, torture as a method of extracting information for whatever purpose, whether it is for general information or prostitution, like my brother Gimara has said. Secondly, the intent of government is seen from three angles. One, the laws that we enact, including the instruments you say were ratified long ago, the Acts of Parliament, the Constitution itself. Two, the institutions. By law, our institutions, particularly security institutions, were deliberately crafted out of Acts of Parliament, and in those acts, they were made open, transparent, and accountable to civilian authority. That's the reason why all the heads of our security services, be police, be army, be intelligence services, are known to the public. They announce the appointment to the public, their photos are everywhere. And the people who follow them, the DSOs, battalion commanders, brigade commanders, rather IOs and so on, are all known up to the parish level in the case of internal security. In the case of the police, they are known up to the households. And therefore, this means that the intent and the practice actually is that these institutions are supposed to be open and accountable to the civilian authorities. The third area is the practice. I think we are failing as a government, as a country, in the practice. What we in the security services we call weak command and control, where you have three types. What is emerging? You have people who act outside the law, security officers who act outside the law. Perhaps they connive with other private citizens to settle scores. And in those cases, it is unlikely for anybody to own up unless they are caught, the abusers. The second area is where there is unprofessional conduct, where you send somebody to look for a suspect lawfully. Upon finding the suspect, they mistreat the person. And the third area, where suspects are held with the good intention, but because of the overwhelming pressure, investigations go wrong. They don't extract information through the right and the civil procedures. In those cases, those three cases, government should be fully accountable for those mistakes. Where it is unlawful, it is illegal, arrests, all government should be accountable for is to ensure that those things do not happen, that the government is capable of finding among its own officers who go outside the law. And therefore, I want to reiterate, torture has no place in Uganda and should have no place. There should be no reason to massage it, to cover it up. And again, the evidence of which none other than the president, including a week ago or so, he issued a lengthy SOP when these matters arose, which steps should be followed in apprehending, interrogating, in presenting. The cases you are referring to, in my view, fall in the second category, lack of command and control. Because why should somebody be arrested and we cannot account for their whereabouts? Nobody admits where they are, but then the person emerges dropped at a police station. I have said on this show before that in cases like those, the weakness, in my view, is in the arresting institutions and the police eventually, because the police should be able to say whether a person is brought by a general, a four-star general. The police officer at the station, at the desk, should be able to say, wait a minute, since you're the one who's bringing this suspect, I want you to record your details here. Where has this person been? And conduct, and I think this is even the SOP of the police itself, conduct basic examination of the suspect being presented for you.
Before you receive them.
Before you receive them.
And book them into the police.
And at that point, you can call a superior officer and say, look, so and so has dropped a suspect here whose visible condition appears to be in pain and is complaining of torture. Can you come and examine? And that superior officer can then deal with this other superior officer who would have brought the person. I think that's where, in my view, in these particular instances, where there's a weakness, and that calls for interagency cooperation to ensure that nobody comes from the military one, nobody comes from CMI, nobody comes from SF, whichever organization it is, and drop somebody and says, I am a big man, I can't be. Because according to our law and procedure, there's nobody who is bigger than the law. There's nobody who's bigger than the procedure of government. So to that extent. And I think that could also go, and I think that's why Mr. Karimani said, they are arbiters, yes, but they have demonstrated instances where suspects have been brought with visible pain, visible marks, even where there has not been professional examination to say that this person is tortured. They have said, no, take back the person, that suspect cannot appear before a magistrate, before a judicial officer in that condition. So I think that's what we need to do with all arresting agencies that are, even mob justice, by the way. You may find a person, a suspect arrested, beaten up, tortured by a mob. Even in those instances, the police should be able to say, you, the mob that has brought this person here, you are not going away until we have conducted proper examination. Now, you are saying since 86, 36 years. You know that the other day when I said it here, you laughed it off. The 10 Commandments were written when? Over 2,000 years ago. Do we obey all of them effectively? We don't. And that is the nature of humankind, that in every society you will get a bad apple, you will get a dark horse. But the point should be for government, how do you deal with the dark horses in the system? Would you reduce this to dark horses, bad apples? Yes. When it is happening repeatedly by different actors? I would still... Is that you set the legal regime on one side, the laws say one thing, the practice is not actually weakness of command and control, it is internal policy. I did say this before. When we had the most atrocious war in northern Uganda, in Teso sub-region, in Karamoja, the cattle rustling, this government never attempted to hide cases of high-handedness, cases of abuse. You remember the case of 18 northern politicians who were arrested in Gulu and Lira and frog marched in front of a minister? The government could have taken away the cameras of the journalists, but it didn't. And for me, by the way, even this current hula balloon, there's a silver lining to it. The fact that somebody is apprehended in the dead of the night, but by morning, everyone is aware. We may take time to secure his release. To me, demonstrates that there is liberation, the process of liberation going on, that you cannot commit mistakes and hope that you will hide it forever. it will eventually come to the surface. Now, I was giving you the case of the Bible. How come we are not able to observe fully the 10 commandments? Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that, thou shalt not do that. So that's the nature of human life. Now you are asking, how come it is repeated almost every other time? One time we saw policemen, soldiers clobbering journalists. Sometimes you see this one kicking this one. Sometimes you see this one, and so on and so forth. I would answer it in this way. I made this example again. The most recent, in the current fight against ADF terrorists, Mr. Karimani can remind me, can correct me. We have close to 90 suspects in that case, arrested and presented to courts. Not a single one has complained of torture, either to the judiciary or to the media. In the case of the people who were beginning to form a rebel movement in the central region, the ones who killed policemen and robbed about 5 guns, which by the way have since been recovered. I think we have about 42 of those. None of those, even when they shot policemen dead, none of those 42 has complained, at least not publicly or before a court of law, of torture. Torture remains the exception rather than the rule. And yes, quite frequently, even when it is an exception, it is made high profile. I am not saying that because it is an exception, it should be ignored or it should be allowed to take place. No, I'm not saying so. I'm answering your question that yes, we shall continue to have cases of this nature for different reasons. It would be absurd, and for me it would be worrying, if a minister stood before Parliament and justified, if I came on this show and justified. But we are trying to put in context. If we are trying to deny, that would be absurd. And so, for me, I think we are on the right track. Yes, mistakes are going on, and you cannot vouch. I will be stupid to vouch that it will not happen tomorrow, because there are societies that are more developed than us, have better resources, have better skills than ourselves. But you still find that those things happen. How did George Floyd die? In the full purview of the public. 3 policemen, 2 standing by and watching the other one kneeling on his neck. And you remember, even in that case, there were attempts to deny that it was not deliberate, it was not intentional. So if a society like that one can have a repeated occurrence of similar abuses, we would be deceiving ourselves that these policemen, these security officers you have, who can do things where there's no CCTV camera, there's no body camera, there's nothing, that either out of unprofessional conduct, out of negligence, even out of raw anger, that somebody will not go overboard. I would be telling a lie.
The example you use of George Floyd has been reduced to racism. But there's also been prosecution. But the major driver, in the case of George Floyd, has been reduced to racism, and the growth of the right-wing movement, even within security agencies in the United States of America. That would be different from what we have here.
And that's why, for me, I am saying here there may not be sectarianism. Maybe some of these are not. I have no data to say, to make a statement that this is our abuses here is as a result of sectarian tendencies. I have given you what I think are the causes. 1, unprofessional conduct of arresting officers. 2, weak command and control, that you send people to the field, or you have not even sent them, but officers are doing things that the command is not aware of. Take the case of 2 days ago in Mbarara. where,
The lady.
where soldiers of 2nd Division, CMI, went to arrest some lady at a premise, at a court premise. Some people had gone to stand shoot for another. And it had to take the public to make noise until they reached, because of the social media circulation of the photos, then it took the intervention of Ndugu Hassan Kasinje to link up with 2nd Division Command, who did not even know what their officers were doing in town, because somebody, perhaps money had exchanged hands, because somebody said, you are cheating my relatives. So this person goes and collects his friends in the army to go and settle a score like that one. So command and control, if it is weak, and can be weak for different reasons. As I said, a soldier or a policeman slips out of the unit and goes because somebody has cheated their relatives, somebody has abused their parents.
If that were the case, Mr. Pondo,
yes.
I have two questions for you. One is, are you suggesting in a way that possibly there is an ideological conflict within the government, that some people believe in the old method of doing things, while a section believes in doing things the right way? That's number one. Number two is that, are you suggesting that the system is so broken down that, I mean, why don't we see punishment?
If it is so broken down, abuse would be the main feature of governance in the country. You would be seeing abuse in Tororo, you would be seeing it in Kabale, you would be seeing it in Jinja every day. If the system had broken.
You cited abuse of the flogging of 18 politicians from northern Uganda.
I am saying.
You're citing abuse.
But this is 1988, 87, before
yes,
you were
from
born.
1988, now it is
abuse of
2022.
politicians. But also, remember, I don't know why you want to say, yes, while abuse can take place, but should we take full-scale claims of abuse, especially where somebody has gone to court? Would you want the judiciary or anybody in public administration to take alleged abuse or claims of abuse, like this recent one, just on face value, or you put them to empirical and professional test? Before you put them to empirical and professional test, we shall call them claims or allegations of abuse. You remember this saying that Socrates, the philosopher, Jesus Christ, who most of you revere, were said to have lived lives that were clean. But because of the words of nerves, you know nerves? Talkers, they were arrested, they were eventually executed, convicted and executed on false testimonies. So it is possible that even some of the claims of abuse, of torture, or the extent could be false tongues, false testimony. So it is necessary, therefore, that those who claim torture must walk to the courts of law and prove their case. And in this particular case, you don't have to rely on the government. Under the law you have just quoted, somebody can take a private person he knows, he saw torturing him, takes that person to court.
Okay.
Mr. Gimara has just told you that in a number of cases, for 5 years ago, since that law was enacted, we have not had, personally have not had many cases where private citizens, through their 50 lawyers, have come up to get medical people to do the medical test and present to court, and the court declined to hear them or did not agree with them. So the question you would ask, which Mr. Gimara tried to answer, he says people are not willing to take up because perhaps they are tormented. They don't want to relive the cycle of the stories. But from my practical experience, what I have found out in the last 5 years has been, particularly where my colleagues in the media have been involved. It is very expensive for somebody to investigate, to meticulously record and present evidence of torture to the satisfaction of our legal system.
Okay.
And therefore, people have found it more convenient, where particularly the police as an institution, the army as an institution, comes and accepts, and they settle amicably out of court. I want to give you the most recent case, the unfortunate case of our colleague, Mr. Kenna, the Reuters journalist. I know this because I was involved. Eventually, Mr. Kenna accepted to a settlement with the UPDF outside court. You remember the case of the two ladies journalists, the one from Monitor and the one from NBS. Those ones were clobbered in Kololo. I think, because I don't hear them anymore, I've not followed that one in particular, I suspect that it could have followed a similar trend of the army coming forth and accepting the mistakes, because that particular deployment was official deployment.
Okay.
The conduct was unprofessional. And the army came up and accepted the mistake. I suspect that the settlement following a similar trend.
Let me bring this gentleman
accepted.
back into the discussion. And I want to start with you, Mr. Gimara, because what Mr. Pondo is saying is rather chilling, because I don't know if the careers of those two journalists, as journalists, is still progressing. And you talked about the chill effect. Is the chill effect out of the torment of not wanting to relieve the experience, or is it out of a fear that you can go out and expose yourself, then they will come for you again?
I think it's a question of both. And that's why in the Constitution, this right was made non-derogable, because of the impact it can have on a person. A person tortured, if you have a conversation with them, they even lose that ability to sustain a conversation with you. They will look around, live in fear of their shadow. Torture is a terrible crime, and that's why it is an international crime. So it is both. One is the lack of resources, and two is the acceptance that if I go forward, I probably will make this worse. Why? Because there is not a demonstrated goodwill, by the people in charge to deal with perpetrators. The day I see the government parading perpetrators of torture, prosecuting them, that to me will be signaling the security forces that this is unacceptable. We have a very robust legal regime, and credit should be given to the government. I think the law you have cited, the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture, 2012, coupled with another one, by the way, the Human Rights Enforcement Act of 2019, have very good provisions to deal with torture. So what remains is enforcement. And that is where the rubber meets the road. To what extent is government willing to go to hold perpetrators to account? That is what I'm not seeing. And that is what we are urging government to do. Why? Because torture is a dent on the record of this government. Torture is a crime, an international crime, and torture is very damaging to people who are caught in it. You just don't want to do something. You don't want to be in that situation. And I normally say that many times, these things go around. You create a system today where torture is normalized. You never know tomorrow whether you will also become a victim of this same torture. That is why I thank OO here for coming out strongly and the government. But beyond this, You cited the case of Floyd. Floyd, as we speak now, has been successfully prosecuted. And that's what we want to see. We want successful prosecution against perpetrators of torture. And for us, until that is done, the rest will be a red herring. Statements can no longer work. This must stop because it is against the law. Torture is non-derogable. And this is the message that we must send out loudly and clearly to those in charge, that this is not something that must be on the report card of NRM. It must come out as a subject completely from the report card.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Gimara. Mr. Karimani will take a quick commercial break, but I'll read this message as we take the break because it's for you, and I'll read it again after the break. It says, Charles, without mincing words, allow me say, in bold letters, judiciary is presiding over torture. And this is the justification. In 2016, a group of lawyers set out to test that 2012 Anti-Torture Act of this land by privately prosecuting the IGP then and his senior officers. A constitutional petition was filed to defeat the private prosecution. And 5 or 6 years later, that matter has not been cause-listed, courtesy of the judiciary. This is a message from a public interest lawyer called Arthur Nsereko. You respond to this after a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
Nbs Frontline.